Good early afternoon. We are live at the Blue Plate Special. I'm Andy Andrews, and you've joined us at Wisdom Harbor Studio at the Wharf in Orange Beach, Alabama. We're glad to have you with us. I'm alone today. It's very odd, it seems like, to be without somebody in here with me. We've got something very special for you today. While everybody's gathering, getting in, if you're new to us, please click that notification button if you're on Facebook. Hi to those of you on Instagram. We are glad you're with us. If you will, share this live feed right now to your pages, to your listeners. Hey, Gene McDonald. Hey, Yvonne. Patricia Clapp. Bob Woodall. Mark Lowry. Hey, Mark. Brennan Blair. Judson, you're always here. Do you ever work, buddy? I'm just, just making sure. Okay. You're a very young man, young dad. So just making sure. So, Phyllis and Andy and Irene Robinson. Wait a minute. Back that up just a second there. Hey. Okay. Good. Yeah. Don Reed. Hey, Don. Very grateful for you in my life, as I am for all of you guys. If you're on YouTube, please click that subscribe button. And hey, old man, Kevin's here. And I'd also like to ask you, if you will, to just think just for a minute about my buddy Brian Backen, who's out on an island somewhere in Twitterland. But Brian, all you Twitter guys, thank you for being here. And we're going to do something very different today. We're going to kind of veer into a different book. I've been hearing a lot about this lately, and I'm going to read an entire book to you. Now, granted, it's only going to take 15 minutes, okay? But I will read the entire book, or at least the major part of the book, because this book, How Do You Kill 11 Million People, came out, I don't know, how many years ago? Matt, do you know? I do not either. I do not know. I just remember what happened when it did. 2011, it came out. And I had a specific purpose for this book, and it hit the New York Times list very quickly, and then just got obliterated by people that I didn't really think would obliterate it. Hey, Mac Richard, by the way. It's good to see you. And Martha Kirby Cruz, Jeff Herring, hey, buddy. The name of the book is How Do You Kill 11 Million People? Why the Truth Matters More Than You Think. And Judson Perkins, you're on lunch break. Okay, then you're good. But I wanted to write something. You know, I had a conversation. I think I've told you guys before. I had a call from the wife of one of our Supreme Court justices, and I had a conversation with her because she didn't believe anybody agreed on anything anymore. And I said, I think we do, and I think we better figure out what we agree on, because in a society with a leadership void, we need to understand that the essence of leadership is influence, and the essence of influence is agreement, not disagreement. Right? You don't follow people that you just fundamentally disagree with. You don't get behind somebody that you disagree with. There's got to be some agreement somewhere. And so if we're going to come together in some way, we have to find something we agree on. And I had been very curious about World War II for years, specifically about the Holocaust. And there was something about the Holocaust other than the obvious that bothered me. I couldn't figure out how they managed to make that happen, right? You would watch the films of the people loading themselves onto train cars, and there would be thousands of them. And hey, Ben Isaacs, this is my favorite Christmas album to this day, the Isaacs. Be thousands of them loading their families onto train cars, and And there would be a Nazi soldier here, and then 10 yards another one, 10 yards another. And I would look at that and I would go, why don't they run? Why don't they fight? You know, what is going on? How do they do this month after month after month, year after year after year? And my question became, you know, how do you kill 11 million people? And when I found the answer, I was stunned. It just drove me nuts because I thought, I don't think we have thought about this. And so I wrote this little book, and I wanted it to be something that never said Republican, never said Democrat, never said conservative, never said liberal. And yet everybody that read it would agree with it. That was my intention. And so, again, it hit the New York Times bestseller list in this form. And when it did, I was booked to go do a bunch of television shows. And I remember being in New York City in a car with the publicist headed to Fox Studios. And they called, and he talked to him just for a second, and he looked at me and he said, they've canceled everything. I said, what do you mean everything? He said, they've canceled everything. And Sean Hannity said, we love Andy, but we can't do this book. I had no idea what that meant, but I wasn't on Fox News for another, 4 years. And I'm still, you don't see me running up there a lot now either. But, you know, somebody asked me one time, they said, why were you on such and such a show? Because I've done them all. And they said, why were you on such and such a show? And I said, well, because they asked me. They were the ones that would actually let me go on. Because, you know, when you have a book out, the one thing that will defeat a book being sold is nobody knowing it exists. And so it was it has been crazy just to see how the book would kind of come up every now and then again. But somehow, after a number of years, I got proof, for me anyway, it wasn't anything anybody else saw. I'm going to show it to you right now, but I got proof that I had somehow managed to pull off what I wanted to pull off. Now, still, nobody really knew the book existed, but, you know, because the New York Times bestseller list, that's like 1 week, right? So, but I got proof that people had found something they agreed on. And so I want to show you a picture now, and Matt, hang on just a second, but when this picture comes up, I want you to look at who these two people are. Both of them are holding this, like this is the book, you know. Both of them holding it. And so tell me if there's anything else you can think of that these two people agree on. Matt, show the picture. So when you look at President Trump and Anderson Cooper, is there anything else they would agree on? But the one thing that I wanted to point out to people is you can go, you know, down the street and ask anybody, do you think our politicians should tell us the truth? Or do you think that, you know, it's okay for them to lie to us? And everybody will say, tell us the truth. My T-shirt, by the way, is from $1 Lifestyles, and it is the J. Hardy Outdoors brand. So it is, but right down here, right down the street from Wisdom Harbor Studios, that's $1 Lifestyles. I love this shirt too, so thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed looking at it, and I would turn around and show you the back of it because nobody prints anything on the right now. Okay, so but now we decided we would do this in another form, do it in paperback, and I wanted to add something. So we added, you know, we got the same basic book, but we also added in here a lot of things from the founding fathers, just letters from the founding fathers for people to read, because it seems to be such disagreement on what the founding fathers thought or whatever, and so I wanted to say, okay, well, there seems to be disagreement on what the Constitution is, so we printed the Constitution in here. Got a lot of common sense in here. The book Common Sense by Thomas Paine, letters from Thomas Jefferson, the Bill of Rights is printed in here. That's so my part of the book is about like that, and the rest of it is this. But I want to read this to you. I'm just going to read the whole thing. And this new book, we have this new book here. It's like $16.95 in the stores or wherever. We have them here, and so for what is today? Is it Thursday? It's Thursday. Okay, so let's say for 10 days. No, let's say for 11 days. Okay. For 11 days, the price on andyandrews.com is $11. Okay, it's a paperback, and then we have the old CDs. And this doesn't have the newer stuff in it, but it has the original book and the question and answers with me, and these for 11 days, $11. So, you ready? Let's read. I really want to do this, and I hope this is something that you can use. And again, something we can agree on. First, the author's note. For many years, I've been asked to speak to political gatherings of one type or another, and for many years, I've consistently declined. Because the books I write are generally regarded as common sense literature, novels that illustrate life's principles, I suppose many politicians have simply assumed I was on their side. However, I'm not really an us or them kind of a person. Actually, I'm more of a we person. Now, don't get me wrong, I do have some absolutes carved into my heart and mind, but I'm optimistic enough to believe there is still common ground, even with those of us who might disagree. Don't we all want the best for our country and a secure and prosperous future for our children? Of course we do. And I believe we can talk about divisive subjects without screaming at each other. Somehow, for the most part, our parents and grandparents managed to disagree with their neighbors and still remain neighborly. And they usually did it from their front porches. Today, most of us don't even have front porches. We've retreated to the backyard, where a single opinion can be isolated and enforced by a privacy fence. Several years ago, I asked myself these three questions. Where do we begin to find common ground in regard to what we want or don't want for the future of America? Is it possible to write something that doesn't use the words Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative, yet conveys a message with which everyone could agree? Can it be written in a concise fashion, allowing anybody to read it, clearly understand the message, and be empowered in less than 15 minutes? In answer to those questions, I wrote the first edition of this book, published in 2011, under the title, How Do You Kill 11 Million People? It became a New York Times bestseller. In the years since then, it has become even more urgent that these questions be addressed. America faces perhaps its greatest crisis, domestically and internationally, since its birth. People often ask me if I have a political agenda. Of course I do, and I sure hope you have one too. Here's mine. I want America's present and future leadership to embrace and live up to America's core principles, as written by our founding fathers and set forth in those important documents on which the soul of America was composed. So, in addition to the text of the first edition of How Do You Kill 11 Million People, you'll find a carefully assembled sampling of America's history's most formative words, written by people who made that extraordinary history. While peering back to the cradle of America's national identity, combined with an exploration of a number of issues and questions relevant to our lives today, here is my wake-up call for you to become an informed, passionate citizen who demands honesty and integrity from your leaders. We can no longer measure a leader's worth by the yardsticks provided from the left or the right. Instead, we must use an unchanging standard, the pure, unvarnished truth. Now we got a quote in here from Plato. He said, "The punishment which the wise suffer who refuse to take part in the government is to live under the government of worse people." Here we go. "The truth shall set you free, for you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." Those are probably the most famous words ever spoken on the subject of truth. Most of us accept that particular sentence at face value. It certainly resonates with our spirit. It just feels right. But what does it mean, really? And have you ever contemplated the meaning that comes to light by inverting this principle? If it is correct that you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free, then is it possible that if you don't know the truth, its absence can place you in bondage? As a boy, I quickly learned that if someone found out the truth, I might get in trouble, or I wouldn't get chosen, or I wouldn't be well liked. Yet my parents urged me to tell the truth and went so far as to promise I would not be spanked if I only told the truth. At Hurd Elementary School, I told my fourth grade classmates that Elvis Presley was my cousin. I suppose it was my way of courting popularity at the time, but Elvis was not my cousin. What I had publicly declared in the cafeteria was not true. And for a time, though it didn't seem possible, I became even less popular. It was a good lesson and helped me determine that in the future, I would tell the truth. Once, when I was 15, a man in our neighborhood told me he would pay me $50 for a particular task of yard work. When I finished, he gave me $20 and said it was the amount upon which we had agreed. It was the first time someone had ever looked me directly in the eye and purposefully told me something that was not true. I took note several years later when he was publicly shamed and financially penalized for another instance, entirely unrelated to me, of not telling the truth. Through my formative years and on into young adulthood, the truth became a touchstone, a goalpost, something to strive for. The truth was always within my sight, usually respected, but sometimes compromised. Once, I watched on television as the President of the United States resigned his office in disgrace. At the time, it didn't occur to me that the nation was in so much turmoil and the President was in so much trouble, not because of what had been done, but because he had lied about it. As an adult, I've become a student of history. For some reason, I'm fascinated by what people said and what nations did so many years ago. I'm also interested in results, the outcomes these civilizations produced as they reacted to what people said and what nations did so many years ago. I often wonder, do those outcomes have any bearing on us today? Should we be more careful students of the events and decisions that have shaped the lives and nations of those who have gone before us? A long time ago, I decided that if history were to be of any value in my life, I could not succumb to the temptation of convenience in regard to my personal beliefs or desires. In other words, I would not be able to categorize people and nations as good guys or bad guys to suit my political or religious beliefs. The truth in what I uncovered would have to trump everything I had ever been taught or believed. Quietly, I could only hope that what I had been taught and believed was true. Sometime during my study of the Dark Ages and Middle Ages, I uncovered an odd paradox that exists in our minds about time gone by. It's a difference most people don't discern between history and the past. Simply stated, the past is what is real and true, while history is merely what someone recorded. If you don't think there's a difference, experience an event in person and then read about it in the newspaper the next day after witnesses have been interviewed. It might be shocking for many of us to realize that what we know as history can actually be a total fabrication, created from the imagination of someone with an axe to grind. Or perhaps, and it certainly happened in the Middle Ages, history was simply recorded by the man with the sharpest axe. On into world conquest, I read, now aware that to be assured of accurate information, it would be vitally important that I confirm records and stories with transcripts and eyewitness accounts where possible. The records surrounding the life of Joan of Arc, her triumphs, capture, 14-month trial, execution, retrial of nullification 20 years after her death, and subsequent canonization particularly fascinated me. Hundreds of eyewitnesses testified over a period of almost 30 years as to what they personally saw or did not see. Do we know the truth about the life and death of Joan of Arc today? One would hope so. She's the patron saint of soldiers, martyrs, prisoners, and the entire nation of France. World history, for those who continue to study it, becomes more defined during the 17th and 18th centuries, particularly during the American Revolution. Records by opposing forces and differing beliefs remain in relatively good shape and can still be examined by those wishing to do so. The people of our present world retain a general awareness of historical timelines and a few specific dramatic events that shaped our lives. We occasionally read history or watch history presented on film, but in terms of why we do what we do, how we govern each other, what our society allows and why, very few of us intentionally connect the truth of the past with the realities of where we've ended up today. So, is the truth of the past even important? What about the truth itself? Beyond the elusive moral ideal by which most of us were raised, being honest and doing good, does the truth really matter? To answer that question effectively, I would ask you another question. How do you kill 11 million people? Obviously, most of us have never even considered such a thing. Yet when I began to closely research our world's recent history, the last 100 years, that particular question made its unsettling way into my mind. How do you kill 11 million people? 11 million. I mean, the number is so large that when the word people is attached to it, it becomes almost impossible to take seriously. Why 11 million, you might ask? What's the significance of that number? Well, it's true, there's no singular significance in that number, and the actual number is 11,283,000. It's the number of people recorded who were killed by Adolf Hitler between the years of 1933 and 1945. Incidentally, that particular figure only represents institutionalized killing. It does not include the 5,200,000 German civilians and military war dead. Neither does it include the 28,736,000 Europeans killed during World War II as a result of Hitler's aggressive governmental policies. Within the same parameters, we could have used the number of Cambodians put to death by their own government, slightly more than 3 million, between the years 1975 and 1979. 3 million from a total population of 8 million. We could have used the exact figure of 61,911,000. That's the number of people who were murdered by the government of the Soviet Union, shown by their own records between the years 1917 and 1987. But only 54,767,000 of the men, women, and children put to death by the Communist Party were officially Soviet citizens. That's 14,322 human lives for every word in this book. During World War I, the highest leadership council of Turkey's Young Turk government decided to exterminate every Armenian in the country, whether a soldier already on the front lines fighting for the government or a pregnant woman. This government institutionally killed their own famous scholars, their own religious leaders, their own children, and ardent patriots of their own country, all 2 million of them. We could use that number. In fact, during our world's last 100 years, there are many different figures from which to choose. 3 million in North Korea, more than 1 million each in Mexico, Pakistan, the Baltic states. The choices available and the numbers of dead killed at the hands of their own governments are staggering. And in other places around the world, they're just getting started. But for our purpose, let's focus on the number that is probably the most well known to us, the 11 million human beings exterminated by the Nazi regime. There are many lessons we've learned from that tragic period in history, but one particular part of the story remains quietly hidden from even the most brilliant of scholars. It's the answer to one simple question. How do you kill 11 million people? Only a clear understanding of the answer to this question and the awareness of an involved populace can prevent history from continuing to repeat itself as it already has time and again. To be absolutely clear, the method a government employs in order to do the actual killing is not in question. We already know the variety of tools used to accomplish mass murder. Neither do we need to consider the mindset of those deranged enough to conceive and carry out a slaughter of innocents. History has provided ample documentation of the damage done to societies by megalomaniacal psychopaths or sociopaths. What we need to understand is how 11 million people allow themselves to be killed. Obviously, that's an oversimplification, but think with me here. If a single terrorist begins to shoot automatic weapons in a movie theater containing 300 people, the lone gunman couldn't possibly kill all 300. Why? Because when the shooting started, most of the crowd would run or hide or fight. So why, for month after month and year after year, did millions of intelligent human beings, guarded by a relatively few Nazi soldiers, willingly load their families into tens of thousands of cattle cars to be transported by rail to one of the many death camps scattered across Europe? How can a condemned group of people headed for a gas chamber be compelled to act in a docile manner? The answer is the answer is breathtakingly simple. And it's a method still being used by some elected leaders to achieve various goals today. How do you kill 11 million people? Lie to them. According to testimony provided under oath by witnesses at the Nuremberg trials, including specific declarations made in court on January 3, 1946, by former SS officers, the act of transporting the Jews to death camps posed a particular challenge for the man who had been named operational manager of the Nazi genocide. Adolf Eichmann, known as the Master, was directed by written order in December 1941 to implement the final solution. Eichmann went about the task as if he were the president of a multinational corporation. He set ambitious goals, recruited enthusiastic staff, and monitored the progress. He charted what worked and what didn't, and changed policy accordingly. Eichmann measured achievement in quotas filled. Success was rewarded, failure was punished. An intricate web of lies to be delivered in stages was designed to ensure the cooperation of the condemned but unknowing Jews. First, as barbed wire fences were erected, encircling entire neighborhoods. Eichmann or his representatives met with Jewish leaders to assure them that the physical restrictions now being placed, these barbed wire fences, upon their community in what later became known as ghettos, it would assure them these were only temporary necessities of war. As long as they cooperated, he told them, no harm would come to those inside the fence. Second, bribes were taken from the Jews in the promise of better living conditions. The bribes convinced the Jews that the situation was indeed temporary and that no further harm would befall them. After all, they reasoned, why would the Nazis accept bribes if they only intended to kill us and take everything anyway? These first two stages of deception were conducted to prevent uprisings or even escape. Finally, Eichmann would appear before a gathering of the entire ghetto. Accompanied by an entourage of no more than 30 local men and officers of his own, many unarmed, he addressed the crowd in a strong, clear voice. According to sworn statements, these were very likely his exact words. Jews, at last it can be reported to you that the Russians are advancing on our eastern front. I apologize for the hasty way we brought you into our protection. Unfortunately, there was little time to explain. You have nothing to worry about. We want only the best for you. You will leave here shortly and be sent to very fine places indeed. You will work there. Your wives will stay at home, and your children will go to school. You will have wonderful lives. We will all be terribly crowded on the trains, but the journey is short. Men, please keep your families together and board the rail cars in an orderly manner. Quickly now, my friends. We must hurry. The Jewish husbands and fathers were relieved by the explanation and comforted by the fact that there weren't more armed soldiers. They helped their families into the rail cars. The containers, designed to transport 8 cows, were each packed with a minimum of 100 human beings and quickly padlocked. At that moment, they were lost. The trains rarely stopped until well inside the gates of Auschwitz, or Belzec, or Sobibor, or Treblinka. A list drawn up by the German ministry in 1967 names more than 1,100 concentration camps and subcamps accessible by rail in Germany. The Jewish Virtual Library says it is estimated that the Nazis established 15,000 camps in the occupied countries. And that's how you kill that many people. Lie to them. But wait, you say. This didn't happen overnight. How did things get so out of hand? How did it get to this point? Well, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, led by Adolf Hitler, rose to power during a time of economic uncertainty in a nation of people longing for better times. Germany was a modern, industrialized nation whose well-informed citizens enjoyed ready access to information by way of print and radio broadcast media. Hitler was a man of the common people. Not long before, he had been a lance corporal in the army, and his speeches were exciting and passionate. He promised more and better and new and different. He vowed rapid change and swift action. According to record, what Hitler actually said in his speeches depended very much upon the audience. In agricultural areas, he pledged tax cuts for farmers and new laws to protect food prices. In working-class neighborhoods, he talked about redistribution of wealth and attacked the high profits generated by business owners. When he appeared before financiers or captains of industry, Hitler focused on his plans to destroy communism and reduce the power of the trade unions. "How fortunate for leaders," Hitler said to his inner circle, "that people do not think. Make the lie big, make it simple, keep saying it, and eventually they will believe it." In Mein Kampf, Hitler's autobiography, he wrote, "The great masses of the people will more easily fall victim to a big lie than a small one." The book was widely read by the German people at the time. The masses believed him anyway. Or at the very most, they ignored him. It's a fact that fewer than 10% of Germany's population of 79.7 million people actively worked or campaigned to bring about Hitler's change. Less than 10%. Even at the height of its power in 1945, the Nazi political party boasted only 8.5 million members. So the remaining 90% of Germans, teachers and doctors and ministers and farmers, did what? Stood by? Watched? Essentially, yes. Mothers and fathers held their voices, covered their eyes, and closed their ears. The vast majority of an educated population accepted their salaries and avoided the uncomfortable truth that lingered over them like a serpent waiting to strike. And when the Nazis came for their children, it was too late. You see, it wasn't only the Jews who were persecuted. Today, most people are unaware that of the 11 million people exterminated, 5 million were not even Jewish. In Dachau, one of the largest and most infamous of all concentration camps, only a third of the population was Jewish. We've all heard of the yellow triangles, yellow stars the Jews were forced to wear for identification. Do you know the other colors that were used? Brown triangles and stars identified gypsies and those of Italian descent. Purple was the color worn by Jehovah's Witnesses, Catholic priests, and Christian leaders who ran afoul of the government. Black triangles and stars marked one as a vagrant, worn by any person lacking documentation when asked for proof of a permanent address. Blue was forced on those who had moved to Germany from other countries, unless they were Jewish, in which case they wore yellow. Red stars were worn by a large and diverse group. You wore red if you were a member of a trade union, a Democrat, a Freemason, or any number of categories labeled as a political nonconformist. Pink badges identified homosexuals, though any suspected perpetrator of a sexual offense such as rape or pedophilia was also given a pink triangle. Green badges were given to common thieves and murderers, and since they were not suspect politically, these prisoners with the green badges, called capos, were often in charge of the others. Purple badges, red and pink and brown. blue and black, all worn by the mothers and fathers and children who were not the first to be selected for the camps. Their badges were worn, their fates altered, well after they got a good look at the yellow ones. In at least one German town, the railroad tracks ran behind the church. An eyewitness stated, "We heard stories of what was happening to the Jews, but we tried to distance ourselves from it because we felt, what could anyone do to stop it? Each Sunday morning we would hear the train whistle blowing in the distance, then the wheels coming over the tracks. We became disturbed when we heard cries coming from the train as it passed by. We realized it was carrying Jews like cattle in the cars. Week after week, the whistle would blow. We dreaded to hear the sounds of those wheels because we knew we would hear the cries of the Jews en route to a death camp. Their screams tormented us. We knew the time the train was coming, and when we heard the whistle blow, we began singing hymns. By the time the train came past our church, we were singing at the top of our voices. If we heard the screams, we sang more loudly, and soon we heard them no more. Years have passed, and no one talks about it now. But I still hear that train whistle in my sleep." With all we now know, does anyone believe that telling the truth will solve all a nation's problems? Of course not. But it is a beginning. In fact, speaking truth should be the least we require of our elected leaders. After all, what are our standards for being led? You see, the danger to America is not a single politician with ill intent, or even a group of them. The most dangerous thing any nation faces is a citizenry capable of trusting a liar to lead them. In the long run, it's much easier to undo the policies of crooked leadership than to restore common sense and wisdom to a deceived population willing to elect such a leader in the first place. Any country can survive having chosen a fool as their leader. But history has shown time and again that a nation of fools is doomed. Incredibly, there are currently 545 human beings who are directly, legally, morally, and individually responsible for every problem America faces. Have you ever wondered why America doesn't have a balanced budget? Have you ever in your life heard of a politician who wasn't for a balanced budget? Have you ever heard of a politician speak in favor of a complicated tax code that ordinary citizens would find difficult to understand? Then why do we have a complicated tax code that ordinary citizens find difficult to understand? Meet the 545 men and women who enact every law, propose every budget, and set every policy enforced on the citizens of the United States of America. 1 president, 9 Supreme Court justices, 100 senators, and 435 members of the House of Representatives. By the way, have you ever noticed that if any one of us lies to them, it's a felony? But if any one of them lies to us, it's considered politics. According to the United States Bureau of the Census, our population has now increased beyond 330 million people. To be clear, that's 545 of them and 330 million of us. Can 330 million Americans ever hope to wrestle the power away from 545? One would think so. But did you know that during the past quarter century, no presidential election has been won by more than 10 million ballots cast? Yet every federal election during the same time period had at least 100 million people of voting age who didn't bother to vote. Knowing that the quality of one's answers can only be determined by the quality of one's questions, let's ask some good ones. Why do the ages of our world's greatest civilizations average around 200 years? Why do these civilizations all seem to follow the same identifiable sequence? From bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to complacency, from complacency to apathy, from apathy to dependence, and finally from dependence back into bondage. Is lying to get elected acceptable? Even if the candidate's intention is to get elected in order to do good works? Is there really any power in one's intentions anyway? Have you ever noticed how we judge the bad guys by their actions and the good guys by their intentions? Who are the good guys? And who are the bad guys? Would truth be a starting point for telling the difference? What is our nation's course? Do you believe that one can determine a probable destination by examining the direction in which one is traveling? If so, where are we headed? Can you hear the whistle and the wheels as the train comes down the track? How loudly are you singing? I still think it's a good book to put in somebody's hands. It doesn't matter which side of the political fence they're on. We are in a time in our nation's history where we must understand that one of the things we agree on is that we want to know the truth. And another thing that we agree on is that we want the best for our children. We want the best for our nation. And so if we want the best, you can't have the best without knowing the truth. You can't have it. And knowing that the best is one thing, I mean, there can be different categories, but we're not talking about among the best or some of the best. We're talking about the best. And if we want the best, it's one thing. And so we do have to search carefully. And we have to discuss politely. Forgiveness has to be a part of it. And we got to think. So, I would be honored for you to give these to people and just say, hey, take you 15 minutes to read it. Come on, what do you think? We have these here, and for 11 days, they're $11. And we have the older audio book of this, what I just read, in 11 days. $11. And by the way, if you come to this later, if you find this Blue Plate special later, you can still share this. Okay, if you're on Facebook, you can still share this to your page. If you're on YouTube, love for you to subscribe, but you can send the link to other people. If you're on Twitter or Instagram, you can send this. And so let's spread the word. Let's get a dialogue going between the 90% of our country that might be just kind of sitting around and wait to see what happens. Let's make sure we're the ones who make something happen and that it's based on the truth and that we're headed for the best. Thank you guys. See you next week.